The concept around being culturally responsive is that it's not static, it's dynamic and it can change.
How do we holistically sort of ensure that there's cultural responsiveness in an organisation, and how do we ensure that that organisation is creating the best environment for not just black staff but also black communities who they are working with on an everyday basis.
Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Impact Policy Podcast. Today's a special podcast episode for us where we're joined by our Director of Policy and Research, Sean McCarthy. It's a great podcast. It's a sad one in many ways. He's off to bigger and better things, and it's something that we're super excited for and can't wait to see all the impact that he has across the sector more broadly as well. Sean's been at Impact Policy for the past 2 years. And he's had the opportunity to lead some really significant projects across the New South Wales public sector. So I wanted to take an opportunity to really reflect on that journey, some of those learnings. We've done some significant work around systems readiness. We've looked at really what structural reform can look like when we talk about systems change, and what we really need to try and understand and do when we do that work well. Particularly, we reflect on our journey through lateral violence and anti-racism, and we talk about this shift that we're seeing between cultural safety towards cultural readiness. So we really believe it's an episode that our sector, whether you're in Aboriginal affairs and policy or not, an opportunity for you to take away a stack of resources in terms of thinking and value for where you go to from here. So if you're a fan of the podcast, if you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener, please take a moment to like, subscribe and follow the work that we do, whatever platform you're consuming this on today. It really just helps us. We self-fund this work. It helps us build a bit of momentum and really share this as wide as we can with our community more broadly. A big opportunity for the work that we do here is about trying to build the capability across the sector as well. So we really invest in this as a learning resource and really hope that as many people across the sector can hear this sort of stuff as they can. So if you have a moment, please take a moment to subscribe, support us, and if you get something from it, please share it with your network if you think they will too. So thank you so much for all your support, and really hope you enjoy the episode.
It's been a bit of a whirlwind last couple of years. Gone
quick, hasn't it?
Really quick, and then it's and I've worked on some amazing projects, like the lateral violence probably being my favourite, the AAG work, that governance group, delving into CoDesign, and even I think probably things that I'd never really considered doing, like CoDesign training and that type of work, and a lot of the evaluation work as well, getting more experience in there. It's been pretty amazing. So
I bet. What was the jump like coming out of the public sector into the consulting world? I'm sure there's many people listening that have wondered what that might be like one day, or might be considering it. What would your words of wisdom be for people like that?
It's hard to explain. I think when I first started, I felt like I was doing the same work that I was doing in the public sector, but having sort of more sway and credence at Impact, and more ability to make change. I'm not sure how I would describe it and how I would say it's different. I think there's a lot more, I was able to step back and kind of look at things more from a solutions-based perspective, and sort of come at it with more of a creative mindset. Come at not problems but work from more of a creative mindset. I'm not as institutionalized in my thinking at that point, so or as rigid in my thinking. So it's been incredibly enjoyable because of that, and I think that's probably the main difference. And just other things like being able to develop operational policies, or some of those internal guidelines that and being a bit creative with that has been fun too.
Yeah.
Whereas in government, they're pre-existing a lot of the time. So,
absolutely.
That's been something that's been different for me too.
You reckon you have a bit more sympathy now for? I know me and you have had mixed experiences in the public sector with consultancy firms and practitioners, where some have been fantastic and others less so. Do you find that you go into where you go to now with, a bit more empathy or something?
Absolutely. Sort of even understanding what it's like on the other side of the equation. So probably will be able to work better with contractors or consultants. Even I think the way you approach procurement would be more enhanced too. So
absolutely,
it's going to be good. It was fun actually. Well, not fun, but it was different doing, responses too, like RFQs and that sort of stuff, because it's, I'd send out statement of requirements and put together statement of requirements in government, and then having to respond was a really good experience actually. Probably gives me a better appreciation of the procurement process.
Massively. Interesting.
And I think a big thing is around Aboriginal procurement too, like getting an understanding of how to improve Aboriginal procurement and processes for Aboriginal businesses, and what it's like being asked to submit a tender as an Aboriginal business. A bit different. So I think I have more of an appreciation and understanding of that. So it's, even from that point of view, like a very minuscule micro point of view, it's feels like I've learned a fair bit or learned a lot. So yeah.
Absolutely. It's an interesting point you make, hey, because like it is probably a real insight that you would have gained on that side of the spectrum in terms of tendering or responding to requests, and how we navigate, where to put our energy, as a small business, and weighing up the risk versus reward sort of thing in terms of our energy and our resources in terms of responding to opportunities, and where we also seek to, as a small business, not looking at opportunities to compete with other small businesses, but really trying to invest in building strong relationships and building recognition and respect for our value and expertise that we bring, and hoping that if the right opportunities align, then we can partner and collaborate, but not getting put into this pool where we've got to fight against our other people trying to do the same thing for us, for government agencies that are scoring us against value for money and all these other criterias that they all have their space and place perhaps, but can also for us be a bit of a friction from a values perspective too. So there's that values piece, but then there's also the practical piece for a lot of small businesses in terms of the ability to be able to do that too.
Absolutely. And even getting a sense of providing clarity in those statement of requirements too, or those tender documents, even for me underestimating the importance of providing clarity on something like a budget, right? And for us trying to navigate that, navigate whether it's worth our time, whether we'll be priced out of something, whether we'll be whether it's sort of worth our time and investment to bid for it, is I probably underestimated how much time and energy just goes into those considerations, and how difficult it is to kind of navigate those considerations. Something interesting you said too, like around collaboration and relationships, and that's certainly something that's such a focal point that I feel like I'm better at now. Developing out really good relationships with probably a broader range of stakeholders, and I think it's not necessarily surprising, but there was always a willingness from black businesses to collaborate too, like probably collaborating with like Mel Siren and on different bids, and seeing that through the COA network as well, and just on other things too. Absolutely. Really partnering with organisations to strengthen bids. And then I've seen it from afar as well with other like ACCOs that have partnered with each other to respond to a quote, but really draw on each other's strengths and enhance each other's strengths. So I think that's something that's been really nice. There wasn't that level of competitiveness, but a lot of support with a lot of like black businesses and consultancy firms too. So
definitely. So I guess one of the highlights for me over the past 2 years has easily been the pieces of work, that have been quite significant in terms of what they could represent, for the systems and sectors that we work across, particularly for our people and communities. And you talked about a couple of them, made reference to stuff like the AAG and the lateral violence work and different things like that. And whilst we don't have to talk about specific, pieces of that work in detail, there's probably room for us to start talking about the purpose and scope of the potential of that sort of work. So I maybe lean into, we talk about the AAG work, but that maybe we can reflect back on some of the thinking and learning from that journey in terms of why mechanisms for projects like that existing are important. And maybe some reflection from yourself on that journey around that work more broadly and what that can mean for whether it's that agency or other agencies that might work alongside our people when we start to think about, how do we think structurally when we, or reflect on, how we interact and intersect with these systems. How can we actually start to think about what structural change can look like? And maybe this is an example of one part of that puzzle.
Probably the common theme or the common thread in a lot of those projects, and even falling back into that CoDesign work as well, is agency or increased agency for mob, and increased ability or not ability, because it's not predicated on ability. It's sort of an inherent, I believe it's an inherent right. But that shared decision making, the ability to make decisions for your own people, for your own community, for yourself even, and decide upon what your needs are and how to meet those needs, or how those needs should be met. And by doing that, you're sort of able to ameliorate, never completely disintegrate, but certainly lessen that power imbalance that exists between any organisation, government or otherwise, and community or individuals as well. There's always that structural imbalance, and taking that approach or developing out, trying to break down systems and trying to not break down systems but change systems, and structures to ensure that there is increased agency, increased decision making, that there is a bit of shared power and responsibility, is inherently important. And I think it helps really properly, accurately identify need. It helps accurately identify aspiration, and just as importantly, it helps identify the most efficient process to ensure that need and those aspirations are met or adhered to or put into place, and it come to fruition as well. So it's more of a collaborative process, but it can really start to, in and amongst all that work, that common theme of shared decision making, increased agency, increased power is probably the focal point of all that work.
Absolutely. And I think for people listening, we're reflecting specifically around how we start to rethink what governance and what structure, what leadership structures look like within agencies that can better function at a leadership level, where they can reflect the communities in which they're making decisions for, where we can consider mechanisms for sharing power and sharing agency around making sure that our people have a voice around any significant decisions at that level that are being made. And so for people listening, like Sean's reflections are very specific to a function of how these systems intersect with our communities, and real opportunities for us to start to rethink how we can start to co-design better ways of working in terms of how this stuff can look like, particularly for our people and communities. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely, and that's sort of over the spectrum of our work, from evaluation to policy design and implementation or project work or program development, to comms and engagement. That's sort of that same common thread, isn't it, or that same common theme. We're sort of looking at it from a systemic point of view, and looking at ensuring that, I guess, mobile people have the ability to lead the direction of work that impacts them and their communities on a daily basis as well. So you sort of learn and develop your own understanding over time, and you try to refine your approach as well. It's a learning process for us. It's sort of something that we try to get better at, I guess, every project or every piece of work that we do, or every day essentially. But
what do you think we could have done better in that project that we can think about in terms of learnings for future thinking in this sort of space? Because from my understanding, a lot of the work that we done on that piece of work, very sort of what's the word, like, not first of its kind, but like, there's not, this stuff isn't happening.
There's no precedent for
it. Yeah. That's the better language. There was no precedent for how we sort of took to looking at this sort of governance mechanism, where a public sector would be sharing power with community around decisions that they're making in a structured and formal way that was not just a sort of tokenistic advisory group or committee or something like that of the sort. So we've gone on that journey, but like in hindsight, any reflections for us as we continue to look at that sort of work, or other people or groups continue to look at that stuff?
I think how you communicate is really important, particularly around, like, one of my biggest mistakes with it. We sort of used a working title off the bat and like labelled it as an advisory group, even though the functions and the roles and the scope were far more advanced than that and far more meaningful than that. So being able to communicate that was a challenge, and probably drew attention away from the intent at first.
Absolutely.
I think as well, just getting an understanding of where co-design, or what different understandings of co-design are misspeaking here, but I think I took that blank canvas approach where I had my own views and thoughts, but really wanted to design something from the ground up. And that received a bit of feedback that was, you said it was nebulous and it's a bit confusing, or they wanted something more solid or tangible to provide feedback on before we could sort of move ahead. So I think for me, I was just really grappling with, okay, is that co-design? How do we go through it? How do we go through that? And I sort of reflect on it now and think, well, yeah, doing that means I was led by mob and people. I wasn't sort of putting my own thoughts and opinions forward necessarily. I was developing out something based on professional and personal expertise and experience, and again, based on feedback. So I think making that change or coming to that realization quicker would have been better. Giving a few different options. I think there's some of the learnings that I would probably take. And also, like you said, it's being understanding that there's no real precedent for that specific structure.
Absolutely.
There are learnings that you can kind of take from other models as well. Like I think when we were setting up the Aboriginal Languages Trust, we sort of looked at different a whole heap of different models.
Absolutely.
And some were relevant, some were I guess not quite as relevant in terms of the template that we wanted to work off, but I think it's always valuable to have a look at that, or what's worked and what's been put in place and how yours might differ. I think taking a real pragmatic approach as well is probably something that is useful, and I think it's, you know, adapting or using what's relevant, what's useful, and sort of doing that more. Looking at, okay, what's been effective, what's been asked for, what's sort of previously been proposed that's worked well or hasn't worked well, where are the pitfalls, really doing that kind of almost this developing a really good sense of the landscape that you're working in, and prior feedback, prior consultation, prior sort of like need, and solutions that are being proposed, and not necessarily duplicating where possible, or replicating, not duplicating, replicating where possible, avoiding where necessary, and then developing out bespoke options where needed is probably the best approach.
Absolutely, but I think the importance of language, that point that you made at the forefront, to pick up on that again, I think is so critical in our sector, particularly when we're thinking about mechanisms like this that are, you know, that there is not much precedent for, how sensitive it is for particularly our communities that have been, you know, often subjected to, you know, a plethora of advisory groups and committees and, you know, points of reference that have very rarely operated in that spectrum of sharing power and giving an agency to, right?
Absolutely. And I sort of go back, as you say that, I go back to my experience in policy, and like, you know, in policy you kind of spend a lot of time like pontificating about terms and sort of like almost taking this really esoteric approach. You sort of hone in on different phrasing used, and you're kind of quite thorough around it, because you're like, oh, this could be interpreted in this way, or could mean this, or how.
We used to hate that, right? We would get frustrated about the to and fro about, you know, why are we stumbling around a word or a phrase, but then we've actually seen on the other end of that spectrum
why it's important,
why it's so critical.
There are times where you get really frustrated around it, and you're like, oh, this is like, come on guys, can we just be pragmatic and move forward? And then you sort of then see like the other, like you said, the other side of the coin, where you're like, oh, that's why we were debating it for so long.
Absolutely.
And I still think there's a balance in that. Like, you don't want to go to war over something that means the same thing. Essentially, you don't want to spend all your time and effort into that, but then you also want to be thorough, right?
Yeah, totally.
You want to ensure that the language that you're using resonates with the community that you're trying to service, right? So
absolutely. And there is a nuance and complexity to some of this work for us in that instance as well, particularly because of the political climate landscape. The fact that what we're doing is, you know, is very significant structurally. We're also working alongside making sure that it is as, you know, we're working within a very risk averse organisation, and so we probably more inclined to urge around language that is less, you know, less risky in terms of how it's perceived, as opposed to, like, you know, calling it the you know, shared power and agency model for any senior leadership decisions across a whole government agency from the forefront. You know, we would call it an advisory group. You know, but yeah, so like, I can understand, like, there's also an environmental and political landscape that we're trying to operate within, where we're trying to balance and move through, you know, risk environments, and, you know, really trying to get endorsement and support for future business cases in this space to try and progress this work even further, so we can have an impact across our communities in this sort of space.
Absolutely. There's all those considerations, and there's a bit of all those factors that you have to take into consideration, and they're from different sources, you know, the cultural factors, community factors, political pressures, like you said, even things like economic, budgetary pressures, right? You sort of, it all factors into what you sort of pitch for, aim for, or try to produce. And then I think one thing we try to do really well here, or I think you're quite supportive of and that we do well is different sort of phases or options, and kind of going like, okay, this is, in a perfect world, this is the best practice model, or what we deem to be one of the better practice models, or sort of better instances of what we can kind of achieve, and then sort of almost not scale it back, but provide a range of different options from there as well. So you sort of look at, or try to look at, identify ways that you can have the most kind of impact and achieve the best outcomes, and then try to look at also what we might be able to influence and inform too.
Definitely.
Some of our other work, we've sort of done that, and I think it helps at times in terms of how we can get something over the line and approved. And I don't mean approved from like a contract perspective, as in like you've submitted a deliverable, but I mean endorsed, and sort of you get that broader buy-in from an agency-wide perspective as well.
Totally.
But yeah, like it's sort of almost a negotiation that you go into, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And you sort of have to pitch and put forward an idea or a concept and get that broader endorsement. But the way you do that is often very collaborative, and looking at like, how would I put it, compromise really in many ways.
I think you sort of lean into with that when you talk about the phased approach to responding and entering into this sort of work. Like we're talking about systems change work specifically when we reflect on this project. And really there's that, you also talked a little bit earlier around some of those learnings and lessons for future work in this sort of space. One of them, big one, was around communication and CoDesign and the work that we're doing and all that sort of stuff. And for me, that sort of really leans into that system, that they talk about, that system readiness piece. And if we're moving into this really structural sort of systems change work, there is a really significant piece of work at the forefront, which is about readiness. And some people might call it the co-discovery sort of piece at the forefront before co-design starts. You can look at it through that lens from a co-design perspective, but then there's also the other actual readiness piece in terms of actually looking at sort of the spectrum of this work, the factors that you talked about in terms of the cultural indicators, the leadership indicators, the environment that we're working within, the readiness for change, a whole range of factors that we encountered at the forefront of that journey. Real opportunities for us to embed really significant sort of communication strategies at the forefront, and also assess that readiness for change too, right? Like if we're going to go on a significant project like this through a co-design lens, I think we had some ambitions for how best placed that would look. And I think if we probably had more, everyone wants more time. Everyone wants more money and resources. But if you're looking at scale, like that's a large scale project that we're working within. So if you have that at the forefront to be able to do that readiness work, I think even in the community too, we saw that, the opportunity for us, because we weren't just doing this, idea of co-design as a journey within the sector. We were trying to bring community alongside with us, because that was the whole philosophy around this shared decision-making sort of governance mechanism, right? And so even the readiness piece within community, like this is what we're talking about, like within this system, it being such a different way of working for our people and rethinking and understanding that journey. Amplify that by 100 in our communities, right? Like even the readiness for that in terms of our community coming along with us on that journey is significant. I think you probably experienced that at a few different times, in terms of the community co-design work that you'd done for that project, based on that journey too.
Yeah, and it's almost developing out that, in that initial phase, really developing out that relationship, almost like seeking permission from that community to come in, developing out that relationship and using that time to, from a systems readiness point of view, it's almost like looking at it from a relationship readiness point of view, does community want that relationship with you? Do they want you to work alongside them or work with them, or come in and begin this work? What do you need to do to start to develop that relationship and begin that relationship, and then strengthen that relationship over time, so you can come along on a journey together? So that's, I think, another critical part of the piece. I've also sort of been thinking about this. I was thinking about it when I was for years now with policy and frameworks and strategies and just general approaches to program delivery as well. I think there was sometimes a frustration with tinkering around the edges. And I think that's in planning specifically, that's where I used to get frustrated, because there was sometimes change, but I didn't see it achieving much in the way of outcomes for Aboriginal communities. And I think and I should say that change from a policy point of view, not from a program delivery point of view in planning. But I was thinking as well, like, there is benefit to incremental change, right? You can strengthen a position for Aboriginal communities to achieve better outcomes, or have more agency to negotiate for better outcomes. It's sort of getting to, it's not necessarily a linear process all the time, as much as it should be. Sometimes you have to sort of maneuver yourself to get into a better position. I think, though, there is things that can't be compromised. So again, it's that question of balance, and sort of almost doing an analysis and assessment of when is compromise and incremental improvement appropriate, when is it inappropriate,
what are the uncompromisable
sort of situations or standards that you want to work towards, particularly in policy, because the more you compromise in policy, the sort of the more watered down a policy framework or document might be. Big ones like sort of incremental sort of work, I think, is around cultural safety versus cultural responsiveness too. So cultural safety is like a minimum requirement. It's important as well, but then that sort of next step in terms of what I would consider it to be like best practice is cultural responsiveness, right? Because you're actually responding to cultural need and feedback. You're using that feedback to inform the way that you work and the structures that you have in place, and the systems that are sort of applicable to everyone, or that sort of not sit above everyone, but sort of everyone interacts with, is probably a better way to put it.
Totally. One of those things around that responsiveness, and I'll come back to that thread, sort of reminds me of just something I want to reinforce around some of those learnings before we move on from the governance work and the systems readiness piece that you sort of lent into there, which I think we did. It's probably, if I reflect on the last 2 years, it's probably like the best example of agencies partnering with us and really being led by our advice and guidance. And if I would suggest, I would say that it was the Healing Circles project.
Yeah.
And I would say that because we had a client come to us saying this is what we think we want to do, and it's based on our years of professional experience in this sector, in these courts and in this process, and we think that this model should happen, and it should be co-designed, and all this evidence to support it, and amazing staff and people there as well trying to drive that work. But our response to them was like that's all fantastic and valid, but like what's really important is actually like consultation and consent. Like, do our communities endorse and support this? Do we want this? And actually having some space at the forefront to consult and ask that question, and comes back to that sharing of power and agency, right? Yeah. And we have to give credit to that team, because they were led by that, and they supported us to go on that journey and test their hypothesis really for like what they wanted in terms of what they thought the concept testing really for CoDesign. before they actually invested all this funding to do a co-design process that eventually our people said we don't want. And I think that just sort of really reinforced a lot of those points that you talked about in terms of communication, readiness, and all that sort of stuff at the front end when we think about sort of systems. And that was, again, another really significant sort of systems change piece for our people in terms of their experience of the coronial inquest process.
Probably one too that they were really supportive of getting that feedback from and embedding lived experience into that feedback loop. And that was like, as you said that too, that was probably the perfect project to work on in terms of from a funder point of view, because they were so supportive of that concept testing. They had a proposed model or a few different options as to how it might work or how it might be implemented, but we're really open to receiving that broader feedback and to either changing or adapting part of those like proposed models or completely scrapping it and going forward with something that's completely different or structured completely differently to what they opposed, or even, you know, if the community said they didn't want that in place, to actually scrapping plans to progress and implement it too, and focus on efforts on other areas. So they came at it with a level of understanding of the importance of co-design. I think a level of understanding that, or level of not even just understanding, but a level of respect.
Yeah, humility,
for shared decision making.
Absolutely.
And for kind of relinquishing that decision making responsibility. And like you said, they did a lot of work into developing out the model based on their professional and lived experience, but also based on research and a stack of evidence as well in terms of what might be useful and what has worked in other jurisdictions and how this can kind of be a bespoke approach. And like you said, complete humility in terms of like, this might not be wanted by community, but here's an option. Do you want to take it? What do you think of it? What would you change? Is it appropriate even to progress this? And we're quite responsive to that too. We're very responsive and receptive to that feedback. There was no ego at the table. There was no, there was just a lot of respect for what was being presented back. And I think that helps. And when you talk about systems readiness, of I think Jess Singh said something around organisational maturity. I think it was the term she used, which was another one that resonated with me, because it's applicable to any organisation, isn't it? Like, is there enough maturity to actually respond in an empathetic manner to feedback and potential criticism, not always criticism, but potential criticism as well. And, you know, you look at it from an individual perspective too, like it's never fun receiving critical feedback, or criticism. So it's sort of something that's just part of the human condition, I think, or just part of being a human. But it also sort of bleeds into organisations too. So, you know, there is sometimes that friction. So looking at like that from is the organisation mature enough to receive some of that critical feedback and then also respond to it? Respond to it in a empathetic but also effective manner. So I think effectiveness is also something that's missed. You could identify something that's problematic, and obviously as an organisation it's probably better if you respond to that and address that problem. Like if we did a safety audit here, right, like it was something that was unsafe, we'd probably be expected to address it pretty quickly, thoroughly and effectively, so it doesn't happen again. So it's the same sort of concept.
Is there a way through that experience for us to understand, like, how do you measure organisational maturity? Like, do we have a you know, if we're thinking about it from an anti-racism lens or you know, from a lateral violence lens, we're thinking about that sort of cultural responsiveness sort of stuff. Do you have reflections or opinions around how you would measure that within an organisation?
There's probably a number of ways. Like, I know that there's obviously a ton of racism assessment tools and sort of different assessment mechanisms and tools that have been rolled out across different jurisdictions. I think that's probably like stuff we've encountered in a bit of like research we've done and sort of evidence desktop reviews and literature reviews that we've done for a range of different projects. We kind of come across things and we're like, oh, okay, cool, this has been used in this jurisdiction. So there is certainly like stuff there. I am a big believer in, and it's probably more of a personal slant, I do believe that doing an analysis of policy frameworks is really important in operational guidelines and frameworks, because then you get a sense of where potential gap areas might be. I mean, I did the same when we were setting up the trust, right? I sort of did a bit of a policy analysis around what operational policies existed that could be implemented at the trust from like a that were ready to just be picked up and implemented, or could be adapted quite easily.
Totally.
And then an analysis of where they'll probably need to develop out bespoke policies. And then so a bit of a gaps analysis, but in other pieces of work we've kind of done that to a degree. And sometimes the absence of anything tangible just means that there might not be that consistency from an organizational perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the whole purpose of having a policy in place, isn't it? To ensure that there's a clear outcome or goal that everyone is working towards, that there's a level of tangibility and that there's a level of understanding in terms of what you want to implement or progress towards. So that's sort of, I think, a big part of it. And then in saying that too, like if someone has an excellent or amazing sort of policy, it's not the be all and end all, but it's also, it gives you a better sense of where things are at, right?
Definitely.
It gives you a sense of intent. And then also like something tangible to analyze, right, and provide feedback on. So that's just a key component that I think should be included in terms of readiness. A whole range of things you could do, some like less sort of direct things, but I think as well getting an understanding of how you're viewed in community and for blackfellas, like how you're viewed by your black staff too,
totally,
or like community partners, and getting their feedback is incredibly important, because like even us, like we could think we're doing an amazing job and then someone was like, no, we didn't want that, you're shit. So or you know that what you did was like, we didn't want that, we didn't think it was necessary, or we didn't think it was effective. It's always important to get that direct feedback from the people you partner with. Totally. Sort of like what we do with at the end of contracts, right? We sort of go through and look at like where we can improve, and from the perspective of our funders, and like what they'd like to see us work on better, or what they liked, what they thought we did well. So if an organisation's able to hear that from their partner, their community partners and their community stakeholders, and then also if by getting that input directly from the community stakeholders, I think you're getting a really robust view of organisational maturity.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think one thing I wanted to come back to was, and I think I sort of cut you off when I looped back to the Healing Circles work around that sort of stuff, and organisational maturity is intersected with it, I'm sure. But I know you and Kyan were talking about and having a yarn about the shift from cultural safety to cultural responsiveness.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can, outline for people listening, like there's gonna be, like bro, there's a stack of people that will listen to this podcast. I think like cultural safety is the epitome of where to work to within their team or their organisation or wherever. And so we've been talking a lot about like actually shifting or evolving from there into what we look at when we talk about cultural responsiveness. But can you reflect a little bit around that thinking and how that's maybe linked back to lateral violence stuff and different things like that too?
Yeah, so I think for me, cultural safety is probably, I'll try to put this in a succinct way that makes sense, but as I say that, I'm probably going to be probably going to struggle with it. But I see cultural safety as just a minimum requirement. I sort of see cultural safety as acting or operating in a manner that doesn't necessarily do any further harm, that ensures that everyone can be in a safe working environment, or a safe environment, where they can put forward their cultural opinion or expertise, or put forward their opinion and expertise. Whereas I see cultural responsiveness as actually the embedding of that knowledge and expertise and that opinion. So for me, if I was working with a community and I was being culturally responsive versus culturally safe, I would, if it was culturally safe, I'd ask the community what their priorities were, what their needs were, how they might want us to meet those needs. I'd come back and I might embed some of it or incorporate some of it, but I'll come back and say, oh, look, sorry, it's out of scope, or we don't have the ability to meet all of that, or we don't have the ability to put everything you said in place. We'll use some of your feedback, we'll engage with you, but there's a sort of limit to that. Whereas cultural responsiveness would actually be like flipping it a little bit. You'd sort of be led by them. You'd embed all that, you'd embed their feedback into the project you're working on, your piece of work. You'd embed it into your organisation's culture and like working environment or systemic structures, and you'd be able to respond to their cultural needs. So you'd be using it to inform the way that you work with them. So they might say, look, you need to lengthen out timeframes because the timeframes you give us are unreasonable, or your communication style doesn't resonate with us. You need to stop using such academic language or corporate sort of lingo and sort of speak more in plain English, or speak more directly, and or speak in ways that really resonates with us and encapsulates what we're saying. And so you would be, lengthening out your timeframes in your project, or you would be undertaking some more intensive engagement, or you would be sort of changing your communication approach and language used in your communication documents to them. So you're kind of using and responding to their feedback, with the understanding that they have that right to self-determination, or that they should have that shared decision-making and power and responsibility, or power and say over the way that work is conducted for them. So that's how I really messily sort of try and explain the two. One's sort of about doing no further harm, whereas the other one's working in an optimal way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the main sort of indicators as well for people to take away, is the fact that like it's an ongoing piece of work. Like, whereas the concept around cultural safety is that it's like, cultural responsiveness is sort of like an output. It's ongoing, it's constant, it's embedded into policies, procedures, communication, engagement, a whole range of different things across your organisation, and the outcome of that is maybe a more culturally safe environment or experience. But like the concept around being culturally responsive is that it's not static. It's dynamic, and it can change, it can shift, and it's sort of like lateral violence is probably a good example of being culturally responsive, right? Yeah. In terms of not ignoring the reality that it's prevalent within particularly organisations, and recognising that for you to be able to build more of a culturally safe experience for all staff, being culturally responsive to the experience of lateral violence is a strong response or demonstration of organisational maturity.
Yeah, that's it. It's about that continual improvement. You're never going to be perfect at it, right? But what you want to do is be better every day, every year, every whatever it might be. You want to see that development and improvement over time as well, and that continual sort of growth. It's never, like you said, it's never about being static or sort of achieving an outcome and that's it. It's something that you kind of have to work at continually. But that's the same with a lot of things in life too. So, yeah.
And I think that language or frame from cultural safety to cultural responsiveness is actually really important, because I know, like we've talked about it all the time around our friction or frustration that we feel around cultural awareness training, and how people, there can be complexities around that because of a range of reasons, but I think a lot of it for us comes back to the fact that many people that go through a cultural awareness training feel that a standard has now been, met. Whereas I think what we know inherently really comes back to being culturally responsive, and the fact that like your learning and your journey is ongoing, and it will impact how you adapt professionally in the workplace throughout a number of, different spaces and places that one, half-day cultural awareness training
can't ever achieve. Yeah.
That might look very different depending on where you are and who you're with. What we'll miss the mark around a lot of sorts of things. So the perspective shift around how you build a more culturally responsive workforce recognises the fact that that is a ongoing way of being in the workplace and space too.
I think that's a perfect example of that. It's not just you meet a standard, you can move on, you become a sort of expert. It's not like a degree that you do or like a qualification that you get. It's something that you have to kind of work at continually, and then it helps give you tools to navigate how you are in the workplace, how you engage with mob, how you engage with and treat Aboriginal communities, and then how you respond to their needs and their feedback as well. So
definitely.
On that, it sort of does remind me a bit of like what Kyan was telling me about like Women's training, which sounded mad, which kind of like actually sort of like,
we'll chuck a link to it in the show notes.
They just sort of like eradicate from the description he gave. It kind of like absolutely destroyed that sort of understanding of that notion from the outset. So that it's just, I think, an important sort of consideration to have moving forward. It doesn't really it's less extractive, right?
Definitely And there's ways to shift and build on resources and training around cultural awareness that starts to shift that frame to responsiveness, to start to build the capability of staff and teams. I think we're not advocating for people to just disregard and throw away cultural awareness training and stuff, but I think what we're talking about and what we're seeing is an evolution of that, the bar has shifted, and we're using this language to help people understand that and think about what that looks like in practice and to consider. But I think gone are the days where you can just think that you put a staff member through a half-day training and then that's where the journey ends.
Exactly right. And I think that's some of the point, like even our understanding of it shifts and changes over time. So the standard of the what's considered to be best practice develops, right? Like anything in life, it's sort of, or in any industry, and that's kind of some of the points that we tried to make with some of our clients, that there was a 5, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, completely sort of different understanding of what that is. And
absolutely,
even the terminology develops over time, and
totally
you sort of develop a better sense over time, right, of what it should be, and that's important too, that we're sort of trying to keep up to date, but also that we're not antiquated in our thinking and our views as well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, like absolutely agree that there's still a place for cultural awareness training. It's just looking at, okay, how do we holistically sort of ensure that there's cultural responsiveness around in an organisation, and how do we ensure that that organisation is creating the best environment for not just black staff, but also black communities who they are working with on an everyday basis. So
absolutely,
potentially, like regular basis. So
and I think we're coming towards the end of the yarn now, but I think that's actually a really good thread to pick up on, is in terms of, like, we do a bit of work now in cultural supervision, and I think that there's actually some of our clients that we've worked with have actually talked about how important this is for their non-Aboriginal leadership, within organisations that might be managing teams with Aboriginal staff or managing teams that are working in Aboriginal communities, and actually how much like they would actually benefit from cultural supervision. And I think really like what that cultural supervision stuff is starting to lean into outside of our communities is actually like cultural readiness in a sense, because it's that ongoing journey and recognition that people are constantly needing to be, growing and developing and understanding and shifting how they're doing what they're doing alongside our communities and countries too. So that's not the answer for everyone in anything, but I think that's an example of how you've talked about, the past 20, 30 years, how we've thought about this as grown and shifted and changed. And I think that's really where we're at right now, is like we're starting to see and understanding that like what we've been doing for so long is no longer enough, and we know better, so we have the opportunity to be better.
And
there are ways for us to do that. So look, I'm conscious of time. For people that hear this, by the time that they hear this now, Sean will have probably moved on into bigger and better things, but we're so excited for him. I've had the opportunity personally to work with you for close to a decade, across some, really significant projects for our people. So some of the best work that I've ever done, we've done together, including the last 2 years. And we've reflected on some of that today. And they've always been impact projects before you were ever at impact policy. And I know that wherever you go, you'll stay closely connected to us as a friend, as a supporter, and as a champion, and vice versa as well. So really look forward to staying connected. This will be hopefully the coolest exit interview and reflection that happens across our sector for a while. And yeah, bro, we wish you all the best, and thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for everyone here. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to work with everyone here and to get to know everyone here and have everyone here be a part of my life. So thank you to Impact, yourself, and everyone that we've worked with. It's been amazing. So such a big part of my life. It's too big to really state. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, bro.